Having what we typically class as an older GPU isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, the GTX 1060 is still top of the Steam hardware survey and has been ever since, well, as long as I can remember. Even some of the top tier older generation cards are actually still amazing, even in 2022. Like this bad boy, the GTX 1080 Ti. Sure, it doesn't have fancy pantsy ray tracing, but it's still able to keep up in the latest titles and at pretty respectable frame rates at a variety of different resolutions. Now this one here has seen better days, but with a little bit of time and some patience, are we able to take its performance and unlock some free performance? Well, that's what we're going to find out. But before we do, here's a quick word from this video sponsor. Hello mate, you alright? Yeah, just got all the bits from my banging new gaming PC. Just got to put it together. It's going to be so much better than yours. Oh, right. What did you get then? The latest Intel 12th gen processor, a feature patched motherboard, and 32 gig of DDR4 memory. See? Miles ahead of yours. You realise that board needs DDR5 memory, don't you? Don't tell me you went and bought the wrong stuff. DDR4 is so 2014. I can't believe you was that stupid. What? No, you're joking. What should I get then? For me, I'd be looking at Corsair's newest Vengeance DDR5 kits, or if you're wanting that all-important RGB, then go for the Dominator Platinum RGB. Oh, you are a lifesaver, thanks, but where can I find out more? By clicking the link in the description below, of course. You call me the stupid one. Okay, so this is the PNY GTX 1080 Ti. It's from a brand you can trust, it has 11 gig of memory, and overall, it's a pretty sleek and understated design. It also belongs to Mike, who is one of our writers over on eTeknix.com. He's had this card for a little while, and I think it's fair to say it needs some TLC. Not only has it completely thrown a fan blade, which short of replacing the whole fan is something he'll just have to deal with, it's also got its fair share of kind of caked on dust. But there's likely more going on underneath that we just simply can't see. Typically speaking, a GPU is called by two means. The first comes down to the GPU core, which will have some kind of thermal compound on it, typically thermal paste. And the other are heat pads, which help keep the phases and memory ICs cool. Now over time, depending on your usage, the paste can actually dry out and the pads end up getting squashed under the pressure of the cooler and or the backplate. That they just don't, I guess, work as well as they did at the time of production. Luckily, you can actually buy replacement thermal pads, and for the GPU core, you can just use any thermal paste. So that's what we're actually going to do. Now, over the past month, we've had some of the hottest temperatures in the UK than we've kind of ever really seen before, reaching close and sometimes actually just above 40 degrees Celsius. And for those in hot countries not kind of understanding, we don't have aircon and our buildings are actually made to keep heat inside. So trying to test this GPU to get some baseline figures was, let's say, interesting. But we did manage to do it. And there were certain things we wanted to test because there's two sides when looking at performance. Firstly, we have cooling performance, and with dust, dry thermal paste and aging thermal pads, this is all stuff that can make a difference. And the other being game performance, which is what this kind of whole video is actually about. With GPUs and the way they work in terms of boost technology, temperatures really do come into play. The way that a GPU works typically comes down to two variables, power and heat. If a GPU has sufficient power and thermal headroom, then it will boost. As soon as it hits those thermal limits though, it will dial things down just to kind of bring the temperatures back in line, and then look to boost again. So by keeping temperatures as low as possible, in theory, you should be able to keep a sustained level of boost for longer, which should lead to higher frame rates with less dips overall. And the best way to keep this sustained level of boost is to keep temperatures in check. So what we're actually going to do is take this apart, get it cleaned up, and see how it compares against our baseline figures. Let's do this. Okay, so with the GPU cleaned up a bit, and for those eagle-eyed viewers, there was actually a reason why I didn't take the GPU cooler completely apart. And the reason is, most people aren't going to have access to a full-on air compressor like we do. So I kind of did, I guess, the bare minimum for an air compressor, which would still be a lot more than what the typical user would be able to do with, you know, them little cans of compressed air that for some reason now cost a fortune to buy. Call it lazy, but there wasn't really a huge amount of dust on it. And a kind of quick blast from the air compressor did actually get rid of most of it anyway. Now, the next big thing to kind of figure out is thermal pads, because not all thermal pads are equal and come in a variety of sizes, with common sizes being anything from 0.5mm to 1mm, 1.5, even 2mm. And when you're getting kind of that close with sizes, it's hard to tell it apart just from looking at it with the bare eye. So that is where a simple feeler gauge comes in, which allows you to see the thickness of each thermal pad, so you can replace them with the appropriate ones that match. Now, while a lot of the existing thermal pads would have been kind of squashed down in certain areas, the outer edges should still be good. So you can use a feeler gauge and sort of start with the thinnest ones, kind of get the thickness, try and work out kind of where it is, and then match it with the right replacement, which EK happily sent over a bag of different sizes. So this kind of actually makes our lives a lot easier. We haven't got to go out and buy the right size after we've measured. We can just sort of, see what we've got here. Then it's just a matter of cutting them to the right size, which I always find a scalpel is actually the best way of doing it. And then you're basically done. Once you're done, you can then spread a thin layer of thermal paste onto the GPU core itself, and then do the reverse, put everything back together. Okay, so all done. And there are a few things that I do want to talk about, because if you haven't got the kind of facility to actually buy one of these thickness gauges or feeler gauges, or maybe it hasn't got the thickness that you actually need on it on the one that you've got, you don't want to go out and have that extra expense of paying, I mean, it wasn't expensive, like £6 to £10, same in dollars. But if you haven't got one of them, you may actually be able to reach out to the manufacturer of your particular graphics card and find out exactly what the thickness of each individual thermal pad is. On this one, it did seem like we had two sizes, 2mm and around 1mm. I mean, it's never going to be perfect, but like I say, you could always reach out to them, or if your graphics card is actually, let's say, a more popular kind of SKU that's on the market, a Zeus Strix for instance, or MSI Supreme X, something like that, there may already be information out there on the likes of Reddit or somewhere on the internet. So we got everything back together. It's still bugging me a little bit that we are missing a fan blade, but I did speak to Mike and he wasn't fussed about that at all. I'm going to admit, not my cleanest work, and the fact that they are blue, it does stand out like a sore thumb, but that is kind of neither here nor there, because we need to now find out exactly how this performs. And that is the whole point of this video, because we want to see if the performance, just by changing the thermal paste, changing the thermal pads, and just giving it a little bit of TLC, if that's even going to make a difference, or if this whole video was just a monumental waste of time. So let's take a look at kind of before and the results that we've got there, as well as the results now that we've spruced it up a little bit. So to test, we used our GPU test bench consisting of a Ryzen 9 5900X, a Zeus Crosshair 8 Dark Hero motherboard, and 32GB of Corsair Dominator Platinum RGB 3600MHz dual channel memory. We ran the same tests both before and after cleaning, running all the games at 1080p at their highest presets, or possible settings where presets weren't available. We also made sure to test the card in a temperature controlled room, keeping the ambient temperature at 23 degrees with a margin of error of 1 degree either way. So let's start off with Apex Legends. Before we cleaned the card, we saw pretty good results of 124 FPS on average, dipping below 100 FPS in the 1% lows. The difference is pretty impressive after we clean the card, gaining a healthy 13 frames a second in the averages and 11 FPS in the 1% lows. In CSGO, we saw a much smaller improvement where the averages went up only 5 FPS on average and the 1% low ended up 5 frames per second lower, which in all honesty is going to feel like nothing when you are already above 360 FPS. But an improvement is still an improvement, so nothing to complain about really. Next up is Dirt 5, and this saw a very good improvement after cleaning. Going up from 74 FPS to 92 on average, this is enough to be noticeable during gameplay. The 1% lows also saw an improvement, but not quite to the same degree. Dying Light 2 had a whole 20 FPS improvement after cleaning the card, bringing it up from 45 FPS to above 60, with the 1% low being only 2 frames behind that 60 FPS mark. This is a really nice improvement to see, as staying above 60 will provide what feels like a smoother experience when in game. So while it's not the best performance and not the best improvement, this may be the one that you notice the most. Our next game is Gears 5, and this was the biggest improvement we saw, going up to 102 FPS from 74. That's a difference of 28 FPS from simply cleaning the card and replacing old thermal pads. And due to this, it would actually be very noticeable in game. So much so that it actually felt like we were using a different card in the second run of tests. The final game we tested was Halo Infinite. Here we saw another case of very impressive gains on performance, where we saw the card going from a still decent result of 81 FPS on average with 1% lows of 67 to an average above 100 FPS and a 1% low that very nearly reaches the same frame rate we saw in the average from before cleaning the card. So straight away, some pretty big improvements for something that wasn't technically much work and didn't cost a whole lot of money to do either. Now, something that allows us to sum things up nicely is to look at the overall average FPS of all the games we tested. And we can see that the card did very well against, well, itself. What we can gather from this is that cleaning your card just makes sense. These improvements are practically free, and the jump in performance is not only a lot higher than I was expecting in the first place, but it's the 1% lows that really stand out to me, where you'll definitely be feeling less dips and a more kind of fluid gameplay. Or at least Mike will, with the shiny looking 1080 Ti, even if the fan is still a little bit broken. Now, I do want to put a small caveat on this, and that comes down to this not being the solution for everyone. The 1080 Ti was and still is a beast of a card, even in 2022. And we saw some amazing performance increases. And while you may get similar or even better, you may get worse. And if you don't know what you're doing, there's always a fear that you may break things. So that's my warning to you. And that's it. So performance is one thing, but that's not the whole story, as we still need to look at what happened in terms of temperatures. Because the performance was better, yes, but what if this better performance has resulted in having a hotter card overall? Well, you'd be glad to hear that it didn't. So not only did we see improvements to frame rates in each of these titles, but also an improvement in temperatures, with CSGO being a particularly striking difference of 8 degrees. Yes, a lot of the other titles only saw 2 to 4 degrees difference, but I'll take that. And it's also worth noting that we tested on an open air test bench, so maybe inside a case we could see even better results. Now, I love making these types of videos because there's no right and there's no wrong. We set out to do something, and if it works, happy days. And if it doesn't, then we've saved you a job and you don't need to do it for yourself. But I think it's plain to see that with a couple of quid and a little bit of time and patience, cleaning your dusty old GPU could make a monumental difference and give it that new kind of lease of life. But the big question is, are you brave enough to do it? It's really not that hard, and if you need any help, then head over to our Discord. The link is down below, and we'll be more than happy to guide you along the way, with no responsibility, of course. With that, hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, a like and a sub to the channel would be amazing, and if you love what we do, then consider supporting us over on Patreon. That link is down below. You wouldn't believe how much of a difference that makes to us, and of course the content we're able to make for you guys. That aside, I'll see you in the next one. See you later, guys. Bye bye.